welcome to the 7th edition of our online worship, which we call Living Room Liturgy. It's a wonderful privilege to be in ministry in this time, and it's a wonderful privilege that you have allowed me to speak into your home. Thank you for that. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I trust that you have downloaded the document again. If you haven't, it's linked in the description below and also on our website. And that you have read John 10 verses 1 to 10. Before I say something on it, let us pray together. Dear Lord, may your word challenge us today. And may you break it as you broke the bread with your disciples. Amen. When we read scriptures, Bible passages, such as the gospel reading of today, it's important that we realize we're interacting with imagery and metaphors that span 1,000 years or more. Some of these very familiar metaphors and images, such as sheep and shepherd and gates and robbers and thieves, seem to translate really well into our own context. We can see these images, we can understand them, and it's clear for us to picture what the writer is trying to tell us. But there are also images in the Bible, especially I'm thinking of the passages at the end of the Bible in the book of Revelation, that don't translate so nicely. They sit a bit weird and a bit uncomfortable in our own context. And it's not so easy to determine then what it is that the writer is trying to tell us. But many of us have been interacting with the Bible for a lifetime, reading the passages and hearing numerous services and sermons or Bible studies on these passages, and as such we've become familiar with these metaphors and images. We may even forget that they have their origin in ancient cultures that are not our own. We may be oblivious or ignorant to the fact that they've been translated into English or many other languages from ancient languages that we no longer speak. At a very basic level, then, I think it's safe to say that even though the images may translate into that which we know, relatable characters, similar vocations to our own day, and objects that we are familiar with, our beloved scriptures may also carry a message that speaks to the context in which it originated. Perhaps the words and imagery can have nuances and references to the political and social and theological landscape of the day that it was written in. And we may miss that if we don't dig a little deeper, if we don't scratch just to get beyond the surface of what we initially read. Now, one such image is in our passage today, and that's the image of Christ of our shepherd, Christ our shepherd king. There are a few more beloved images in our Bible than this. In the early church, it was the most iconic image of Christ being depicted as a shepherd, often carrying a lamb, often being the caring and loving shepherd tending to his flock. It's common to both the Old and the New Testament to find references to God as a shepherd, God as a shepherd king. And today we understand that John is telling us a parable. He's telling us of Jesus telling a parable, where Jesus is referring to himself as the shepherd, as a leader, and his followers to be the flock. But this image, although iconic to the Christian faith, is not unique to Jesus' teachings. It's not unique to Christianity. Scores of ancient kings, and I've listed them in the writings, called themselves shepherds as early as the 3rd millennium, and then often tied it with adjectives such as righteous or humble or obedient or loving. It was also common in the Hellenistic world, the Greek world. And there the title shepherd of the people was a common title for leadership. And we find it tied to many of the names that we know. Odysseus, Nestor, and even Philo used the term in some of his own writings. And then the use continued well into the Roman era, where the governors and those in power owned this title for themselves, calling themselves shepherds and the people they lead to be sheep and lambs in the flock. But as much as they loved the title, it was even more revered under the gods, those in the pantheon, to be shepherds. Our known and loved image of Jesus then, Jesus being the shepherd king, is heavily laden. It's not just a comforting, simple image. It's got layers and layers of complexity. It's got years and years of history. And when Jesus then says, I am the good shepherd, he immediately speaks into a larger context. And I ask why? Why would Jesus use this to refer to himself, his purpose, and his people? Now, one option is to read this in the light of the Roman Empire. The Gospels introduce us to Jesus as a radical leader who publicly opposed the socio-political, theological landscape and structures of his day. Not just in words, but in what he actually did, by feeding the hungry and healing the sick and empowering the individual and including the outcast. Jesus did what those structures failed to do. And as such, in a Roman world, the title for a governor or an emperor of a good shepherd is somewhat ironic, because they were not that. They were quite the opposite of a good shepherd. And when John then presents Jesus as the noble shepherd who gives his life for the benefit of his sheep, and the ruler who serves as the gateway to abundance, and the Lamb of God, he starkly highlights the failure of Rome, the failure of even the Jewish institutions of the day to serve the needs of the people. And the empire relied on violence to create this false sense of security and safety and providence. And so when Jesus speaks about himself and teaches his disciples and those around him that he is the good shepherd, I think he's addressing four things. I think firstly, he's addressing that only God is able to be trusted to fulfill the promise of life and all that it entails. Safety, providence, care, nurture, rest, growth, all those things can only come from the unfailing God. Putting our trust in systems and structures may aid, but it can never be where it all comes from. Only God is able to fulfill this. Only God is the one who can be trusted with life. The second thing I think Jesus is addressing is that the familiarity of his voice, of his teachings, of his life, is what ensures that his disciples and his followers know who to follow. He knows them by name. It's not just a number, not just another one. There's an intimate relationship between our shepherd and ourselves. He knows us by name. He knows where the green pastures are. He knows where to lead us to. How often have I found myself in a scenario where I think, Lord, lead me. I'm not sure where to go. I'm not sure where to walk. And by looking at God and hearing the voice of Jesus saying that I am the good shepherd, I know where the green pastures are, I can lead you there, you can follow me. I think Jesus is addressing that need, that want, and promising that he is the good shepherd who can be trusted with that. The third thing I think Jesus is addressing is that to be a follower of Jesus is to be going somewhere. There's never an arrival in our journey with God. There's never the ultimate, I've now arrived, I know it all, I know God completely, I can just sit back and kind of be. There's never that. There's always a journey of transformation, of being transformed more and more into the image and likeness of our Savior, of our Shepherd King. And it's in this journey with Jesus that the abundance of life can be discovered, can be pursued, and can be enjoyed. And I think Jesus is addressing that. And today we also need to look into our own hearts and ask, where are we seeking life? Where are we seeking transformation? And the fourth thing that I think Jesus is addressing, and this directly opposes the empire, is that the agenda that Jesus has, and his kingdom's agenda, is an open agenda. It's not hidden. He's very open about it, that he brings life to the flock, where robbers and thieves take it away. He ensures that the whole kingdom gains by his own personal sacrifice, where robbers and thieves sacrifice the flock for their own gain. The rulers of this world, of the world that Jesus lived in, especially that world, had a completely different agenda. Personal gain, personal fortune, personal power and might and control was on the agenda there. And Jesus says, I give my life so that my flock may have it all. Have life. And not just a little bit of it, but the abundance of life that was intended. The metaphor of Jesus being the shepherd, the gate, and the lamb has always been comforting, but it's also a very complex metaphor. Our default reference to frame this in and to understand this in is one of comfort, of safety, and of care that is provided by God our King. And whilst this is good and true, we need to also keep in mind that Jesus had a revolutionary voice, and he was introducing a very, very different way of living. A way that changed the world. A way that changed the religious and political and social landscape of his day, and has been continuing to do so for thousands of years after that. When he says the kingdom of heaven is near, he's referring to this way of life. This complete different value, this agenda, where not the individual, but all those who follow Jesus are entitled to the abundance of life. We should take care then not to be comforted by this passage too quickly. And while it certainly speaks to those parts of our lives that need to be comforted, that need to be assured that Jesus is our Shepherd King, we must also open our imaginations to the more uncomfortable implications of this passage. It's easy to critique Rome. It's easy to be the critic on the sideline, but there are far too many similarities between what happened in Rome and in the day that Jesus walked the earth and our own world. The social and political and theological structures of our own day may share in the blame, may share in missing the message. And so I dare to ask, that you and I look at our own lives and our own world and ask a few questions. Where are we participating in systems that oppress people, hindering them to have the abundance of life that Christ has promised us? Where do we grapple and grasp for power? Where are we challenging the systems even when it has a price tag, even when we may have to pay the price? Are we following the voice of the Good Shepherd? Do we know that voice? Are we familiar with his ways and his teachings? And that it calls us to challenge systems and follow this path with him to abundant life? Or are we silenced and lamed and worried and unsure of who this shepherd king really is? Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I know the way to green pastures, and I hold the key to abundant life. May the Spirit of God be with us as we continue to be challenged by this passage, by the metaphors and images in our Bible. I pray that you and I may seek God and find him with open arms, but not just find him, also allow him to transform us into his image and into his likeness. May we be bearers of hope, of life, of abundant life to the world that we live in. Amen.